I guess the part that really stings isn't what he said. It's that everyone laughed before I even processed the words. One sentence tossed across a polished oak table at the company's annual dinner, and suddenly I wasn't a grown man with 6 years of experience. I wasn't the one who stayed late, fixed the numbers, covered other people's mistakes. I was just the joke, a punchline wearing a button-down shirt. And I wish I could tell you I snapped back, or at least defended myself. But I didn't. I sat there with a frozen smile, wondering when exactly my colleagues decided I was someone they could laugh at instead of speak to. It started an hour earlier, when I'd walked into the restaurant. Low lighting, thick carpet, a place where people pretend to be richer than they are. I took a seat at the middle of the table, the safe zone, not too close to management, not close enough to invite conversation. Just a chair. I've always been good at being just a chair. Mason arrived last, like he wanted an entrance. He always does. Tall, tan, expensive haircut that looks messy on purpose. He works 2 levels above me, senior analyst, and he likes to remind everyone that the word senior is inseparable from his identity. He clapped 3 people on the back, kissed someone's cheek, and then slid into the seat across from mine with the confidence of a man who has never questioned his place in a room. The wine had barely been poured when he started. "Evan," he said, smiling like he was about to compliment me. "Still entry level, huh? Man, 6 years and you haven't leveled up? That's commitment." The table erupted. Even the interns laughed, probably because they thought they should. Forks paused midair, glasses clinked, and I sat there, feeling my ears heat up while Mason leaned back, proud of himself like he'd just delivered a TED Talk instead of a cheap shot. Someone added, "Maybe he just likes the view from the bottom," and the laughter rolled again, smoother this time, the kind that says, "We've all been thinking it." I took a sip of water, not because I was thirsty, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I stared at the linen napkin on my lap, perfectly folded, perfectly useless, like me in that moment. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain that I'd been doing work above my pay grade for years, or that my last 3 requests for advancement got delayed because timing, budgets, and restructuring. I didn't say I had been covering Mason's mistakes so routinely that I could identify his errors by the shape of his spreadsheets. I didn't say any of that, because no one would have listened. But someone did notice. At the very end of the table sat a man I hadn't met before. Mid-40s, calm posture, dark suit that didn't scream wealth but whispered competence. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. His fork rested untouched on his plate as he observed the scene with a stillness that felt deliberate. Our eyes met for half a second, and the expression he gave me wasn't pity. It was recognition. I looked away quickly. I didn't know who he was, and in that moment, I didn't care. All I wanted was for the dinner to end, the lights to dim, the carpet to open and swallow me whole. But the night kept going. As the plates were cleared and the conversation shifted, Mason leaned toward a director 2 seats down and said loudly, "Honestly, we need more ambition on the team. I mean, Evan's a nice guy, but you can only carry dead weight for so long." That one wasn't even disguised as a joke. That one hurt. The director coughed awkwardly, but didn't contradict him. I stared at my water glass again. It was easier than looking at people. My heart beat quietly, but hard, like it was trying to get my attention without alerting anyone else. I told myself it wasn't worth reacting, that one evening didn't define who I was. But the truth is, in that moment, I felt small, smaller than I had in years. I pushed my chair back as dessert arrived, mumbling something about needing fresh air. The room's laughter followed me all the way to the hallway, clinging to my clothes like cigarette smoke. Outside, the air was sharp and cool. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the lights of passing cars blur into streaks. I tried to swallow the embarrassment, but embarrassment doesn't swallow. It sits, heavy and stubborn, right behind your ribs. When I walked back inside, the dinner was ending. People were gathering coats, finishing last sips of wine. Mason slapped me on the shoulder as he passed. Nothing personal, man. You know how it is. I nodded, though I didn't know how it was. Not really. Not until that night. As I headed toward the door, the man from the end of the table stepped into my path. Up close, he looked even more composed. Evan, right? His voice was steady, almost too calm for this environment. I blinked. Yes, sorry. Have we met? Not yet, he said. But we will. Before I could respond, someone called his name from across the room. He gave me a brief, deliberate nod and walked away. I didn't know his title. I didn't know his role. I didn't know why he'd said that. But I knew one thing. The joke Mason made tonight, it wasn't the final word. And as I left the restaurant, coat in hand, I realized something else. Something that settled in my spine with a quiet, unfamiliar certainty. What happened tonight wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a line I hadn't realized I was ready to draw. Monday morning, the office felt like it had a hangover. After the company dinner, the floor was quieter than usual, the way it gets when everyone remembers they laughed at the wrong things. I walked in at Op 45, badge beep, coffee in hand, ready to bury myself in spreadsheets and pretend Saturday never happened. That lasted until I heard Mason's voice from the break room. I'm just saying, some people get comfortable at the bottom. If you don't push yourself, no one else will. His tone had that fake motivational edge he uses when he's really insulting someone. I didn't have to guess who he meant. I stepped in anyway, mostly because my mug was empty. He was leaning against the counter with 2 junior analysts and an intern. The second he saw me, Mason's eyes lit up. Morning, Evan, he said too loudly. How's my favorite backbone of the entry-level team? No one laughed this time, but no one said anything either. I set my mug under the machine. Morning. The report for Q3 variance is in your inbox. You might want to read it before the 10 a.m. with finance. There's a section with your name on it. His smile flickered. Sure, he said. Thanks, man. Always appreciate your support. Support. That's what he called it when I cleaned up the mess he made last quarter, misclassifying revenue that almost made it into a board deck. I'd caught it at 11:30 p.m., alone, while he was posting rooftop stories with the caption, Grind never stops. I didn't tell that story. I just took my coffee and walked out. It would have been easier if Saturday had been an isolated thing. But it wasn't. Mason's comments had been a slow drip for years. You're too nice to be a manager, Evan. You're the kind of guy who'd turn down a promotion because you don't like conflict. Some people lead, some people stabilize. Always with a smile, always loud enough for someone else to hear. At 10 a.m., we filed into the conference room for the finance meeting. Mason took his usual spot near the head of the table, close enough to the directors to feel important, far enough to dodge fallout if anything went wrong. I sat near the middle, laptop open. When our director, Karen, walked in, she wasn't alone. The man from the dinner stepped in behind her. Everyone, this is Daniel Harper, Karen said. He'll be joining us in 2 weeks as our new departmental director. He's here today to observe. So that's who he was. Daniel gave a short nod, scanning the room. When his gaze passed over me, it lingered for a beat. Then he took a seat at the far end, notebook closed. The meeting started. Mason took the lead on the deck he'd insisted on presenting. Q3 has been challenging, he began, clicking through slides, but thanks to some late pushes, we've managed to land close to target. I watched him talk through charts and graphs I had built, using language I had written. He didn't lie exactly. He just edited the truth in his own favor, the way he always did. Halfway through, Daniel raised a hand. Can you go back 2 slides? Mason clicked back. The adjustment here, Daniel said, pointing to a variance bar. What triggered it? Mason glanced at the screen. We reclassified a portion of the revenue in October. Routine housekeeping. Daniel's eyes shifted to me. And you handled the reclassification? The room turned. Yes, I said. I flagged the inconsistency during the final review. The reclass avoided overstating revenue by about 3% for that segment. Karen frowned. Was that the issue you emailed me about at the end of the quarter? Yes. Mason let out a small laugh. Look, Daniel, the team's solid. Evan's just very detail-oriented. He likes to save us from ourselves. The way he said it, you'd think I was an overprotective parent, not the person who prevented a compliance problem. Daniel didn't smile. He just made a note. Good, he said. We need people who actually read the numbers. The rest of the meeting dragged. When it ended, Karen thanked everyone and left with Daniel. The room emptied. Mason clapped me on the back. See? He said. Team effort. You do the details, I handle the room. That's how we've always worked, right? Right, I said. Because that wasn't how we'd always worked. That was just how he'd always liked to describe it. At 12:30, I went back to my desk, opened my inbox, and stared at the email I'd been ignoring all morning. Subject, offer letter, lead analyst, Chicago office. It had arrived Friday afternoon, right before I shut down for the weekend. Higher title, higher salary, new office, new team. I'd read it 3 times, sitting alone in my apartment, imagining a life that didn't include this floor, this team, this version of me. They wanted my answer by Tuesday. Around 2, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. Can you stop by my office at 3? Daniel and I want a quick chat. My stomach tightened. Sure, I typed back. Mason drifted by my desk 20 minutes later, spinning the pen between his fingers. You going to the happy hour Friday? He asked. We're celebrating the quarter. I'll buy you a drink for saving my ass with that variance thing. We'll see, I said. I've got a few things to take care of first. At 2:58, I stood outside Karen's office, knuckles hovering over the door. I took a breath, knocked once, and stepped inside when she called my name. Daniel was there, seated in the chair beside her desk, notebook open now. Evan, Karen said, gesturing to the remaining chair. Come in. Close the door. I did. The latch clicked behind me, quieter than my pulse. I thought they were going to talk about the variance, or the meeting, or give some generic feedback about visibility and owning my contributions. What they actually said changed everything. I didn't know it yet, but the way I answered in that room was going to decide who walked out with a future and who walked out with a problem. Karen folded her hands on the desk. Daniel didn't. He just watched me, steady and unreadable, like he was waiting to see which version of myself I'd show him. Evan, Karen said, we want to talk about something we observed at the dinner, and something we've been seeing for a while. My throat tightened. Okay. Daniel leaned forward a little. You handled yourself well Saturday night. I blinked. I didn't do anything. That's exactly why, he replied. Some people get louder under pressure. You get clearer. Karen nodded. We've been reviewing internal performance patterns, and we've noticed a mismatch. Mismatch, I repeated, unsure where this was going. She clicked a file open on her screen. I recognized the dashboards immediately. My dashboards, my formatting, my formulas. These, she said, are excellent, month after month, consistent, precise, but they're not coming from someone at your level. I hesitated. They're part of the team effort. Daniel's eyebrow lifted. Let me guess. Team effort that someone else presents at meetings. Someone who takes the visible parts and leaves you the aftermath. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He continued. I've reviewed 3 quarters worth of projects. Every time there's a mistake in the early drafts, your edits fix it. Every time something goes wrong at the 11th hour, your emails document it. Quietly, thoroughly, professionally, Karen sighed. And yet the recognition disproportionately falls to someone else. She didn't say Mason's name. She didn't need to. Daniel tapped his notebook once. You got an offer from Chicago, right? The breath stalled in my chest. How did you... Because they called me when they extended it, he said. I used to oversee analytics there before moving divisions. I trained half the department you'll be joining. That explained a lot. The gaze at dinner, the recognition, the calm. Karen looked almost relieved that it was out in the open. We don't want to lose you, Evan. I opened my mouth, but she raised a hand. Before you say anything, let me be clear. We're not asking you to stay as you are. We're asking if you'd consider a different role. Here. We think you're operating at a lead level, Daniel said. Have been for a while. And if you stay, I intend to correct the structure that's been neglected. Neglected. A polite word for someone hogged credit and no one stopped him. Before you decide, Daniel added, there's one thing I need you to walk me through. He turned his notebook toward me. On it were 3 screenshots. Revenue reports and variance tables. Mason's work. This reclassification issue from last quarter, he said. Explain it to me from the start. I went through it, line by line, why it mattered, how it happened, what it would have done if it wasn't caught. My voice stayed even, factual. No blame, no emotion, just truth. When I finished, Daniel exhaled slowly. Interesting, he said, because Mason told the senior directors it was his catch, that he flagged it during a routine check. My jaw tightened, not from surprise, from confirmation. Karen looked pained. And this wasn't the only incident. Daniel closed the notebook. Evan, I want to speak with both of you, together. The air in the room shifted, not tense, decisive. At 3:20, Karen called Mason's extension. Can you come to my office? She said. Daniel wants to chat. Mason arrived with a bright, confident smile, like he assumed this was about his strong leadership presence. He nodded at me casually. Hey, man, you needed me? Daniel pointed to the chair beside mine. Sit. Just that. No warmth. Mason sat. Then Daniel laid the screenshots on the desk. Mason, he said calmly, would you walk me through these? Specifically the variance correction you said you identified. Mason didn't blink. Of course. He launched into a rehearsed explanation. Corporate, polished, completely divorced from reality. Halfway through, Daniel raised a hand. Stop! Mason froze. Your explanation contradicts the correction log. It also contradicts what's recorded in the version history. It contradicts the time-stamped emails. And it contradicts what Evan just walked me through. Color drained from Mason's face. Look, Daniel, I think maybe you're misinterpreting. Careful, Daniel said quietly. You're not in danger because of a mistake. You're in danger because you believe we can't see who actually carries this team. Karen looked at Mason with the expression of someone realizing she should have stepped in months ago. Mason, she said gently, you've been relying on Evan's work to stabilize your deliverables. That's not collaboration. That's dependency. Mason swallowed hard. I think this is being blown out of proportion. It's not, Daniel replied. But that's not the biggest issue. He paused. The biggest issue is the way you treat him. The silence that followed felt like an entire hallway had gone quiet. Daniel leaned back. Public disrespect, targeted comments, diminishing a colleague's contributions. That ends today, permanently. Mason's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It was just joke stuff, you know? Team camaraderie. Daniel tilted his head. Is that what you call it? Because I was at the dinner, too. Mason froze. And I don't tolerate leaders who need to belittle someone to feel like one. Another silence. But this one wasn't heavy for me. It was clarity. Then Daniel turned to me. Evan, he said, you're stepping into the lead role. Here, effective as soon as HR processes the paperwork. Your compensation package will match the Chicago offer. My breath caught. Karen smiled softly. We should have done this sooner. Mason stared at me like he couldn't understand how the ground moved without warning. And then came the moment. Small, sharp, clean, where everything inside me aligned. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't look away. I just finally saw the truth. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. I stood up, shook Daniel's hand, thanked Karen, and walked out of the office with a steadiness I didn't know I had. Behind me, Mason's voice cracked into a question he didn't want to know the answer to. I didn't look back. Some endings don't need witnesses. The morning after everything happened, I came into the office earlier than usual. Not because I wanted to make a statement, but because for the first time in a long while, I actually wanted to be there. The floor was quiet, soft hum of printers, the smell of burnt coffee no one ever remembers to replace. My desk looked the same as always, but I didn't. Something in me had settled. Not pride, not revenge, just alignment. At 9:05, HR emailed me the updated contract. New title, new compensation, new responsibilities. I read it twice, signed, and sent it back without any ceremony. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like something that should have always been true finally caught up with reality. By the time the rest of the team arrived, I was already reviewing the upcoming quarter's project roadmap. Mason walked in at 9:23. His eyes were red, not from crying, probably, but from a night spent trying to rewrite the world in his head so he wasn't the villain. He paused when he saw me, then looked away quickly and headed to his desk. He didn't say good morning. I didn't expect him to. Around 10, Karen called a brief team meeting. Most of the department gathered near her desk. Daniel stood beside her, calm as ever. When I approached, a few people straightened, unsure of how to behave now. Karen cleared her throat. We have some organizational updates. As of today, Evan will be assuming the role of lead analyst and will manage strategic oversight for all quarterly reporting initiatives. A small ripple moved through the group. Surprise, mostly. A few nods. A couple of expressions I recognized. People realizing they'd underestimated someone they'd worked beside for years. Daniel added, I'll be working closely with him over the next month. Expect changes to workflow. Then the part no one fully anticipated. And Mason, Daniel said, turning to him with a neutral expression, you'll be transitioning off the Horizon project effective immediately. We'll reassign your workload after review. Mason tried to smile, but the muscles in his face didn't support it. Can I ask why that decision was made? Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. Because the project requires someone who can execute without relying on others to fix foundational issues. Not cruel, not loud, just factual. A few people lowered their eyes. Mason nodded as if he understood, though the understanding was more like resignation than acceptance. The meeting ended quickly. People returned to their desks, pretending to focus on work while whispering behind monitors. I didn't approach Mason. I didn't need to. Later that afternoon, he stopped by my desk. His hands were in his pockets, shoulders tight. He looked like a man forcing himself toward a conversation he didn't want to have. Hey, he said, voice low. Got a minute? Sure. He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Look, what happened yesterday? You didn't expect consequences, I said gently. Not mocking, just naming it. He winced. I didn't mean anything personal at the dinner. It was just jokes. I know, I said. That was the problem. He swallowed hard. So, is this how it's going to be now? Professional, I said. Nothing more? Nothing less? He nodded, defeated. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. Really apologize. But Mason isn't built for accountability that deep, he muttered. Right. And walked away. That was enough. By the end of the week, things felt different. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but quietly. People asked for my input more openly. They took my suggestions seriously. Even the interns, who used to treat me like part of the office furniture, started stopping by with questions, not out of fear, out of respect. Friday evening, I moved into my new office. It wasn't big, just a glass-walled corner with a second monitor and a slightly nicer chair. But when I placed my notebook on the desk and turned on the lamp, the room felt settled. Like a reality I recognized. Daniel appeared in the doorway. Getting comfortable? He asked. Trying to? I said with a small smile. He stepped inside. You should know, none of this happened because you were wronged. It happened because you were ready. I let that sink in. One more thing, he added. Don't waste energy thinking about Mason. People who climb by stepping on others eventually lose their footing. I nodded. I'm not worried about him. Good. He tapped the doorframe. Enjoy the weekend. When he left, the office was quiet, golden in the fading light. I sat there for a moment, letting the stillness settle over me. Not as a reward, not as a victory lap, just peace. Peace, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in softly when the noise stops. On my way out, I passed Mason's desk. He was staring at his monitor, not working, just staring. For a second, he glanced up at me, searching my face for something. Anger, satisfaction, triumph. I didn't give him any of it. I just nodded once, neutral and polite, the way you acknowledge someone who is no longer part of your gravity. He looked away first. That night, I walked home instead of taking the train. The city air felt different, not lighter, just cleaner, more breathable. My phone buzzed with a message from the Chicago office asking if I'd formally declined their offer yet. I typed back, "Accepted internal promotion. Thank you for everything." As I hit send, I stopped at a crosswalk, watching traffic move steadily in the dusk. No adrenaline, no echo of the dinner where this all began, no resentment, just the simple knowledge that I had stepped into a life that finally fit. Not because someone handed it to me, not because someone apologized, not because justice demanded a witness, because I chose it. The story didn't end with a punch or a speech or a downfall. It ended exactly where it should, with me walking home, steady, sure ring of streetlights above me, feeling like, for the first time in a long while, nothing in my world was out of place, and that was enough.